Thank you all so much for attending our final event of the 36th Annual Gender Studies Symposium. My name is Abby Griscom, and I am one of the symposium co-chairs. The past 3 days have been filled with passionate discussions, insightful panels, and meaningful workshops. We want to thank everyone for participating in this symposium. We also want to thank everyone who was a part of the symposium planning process and volunteering as well. I want to give an extra special thank you to Kim Brodkin, who is the life force and very much the only reason that the symposium happens every year. So thank you so much, Kim. We have worked so hard to put together this symposium, and I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as we have. Before I hand it over to Shade to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Roxanne Gay, I'd like to remind all of you of some housekeeping notes. Please silence your cell phone, but also remember to live tweet during the event using the hashtag symposium LCGenderSymp. We are recording tonight's presentation and will post a video to the symposium website in the upcoming weeks. No personal recording of the event is authorized. During the Q&A portion of this event, please approach one of the 2 microphones to ask questions. There is one microphone in the center aisle and another in the aisle on the left side of the room. After Dr. Gay's presentation, she will be signing books in the Gregg Pavilion. Please allow time for Dr. Gay to be escorted out of the room before you leave. There will also be books for sale. We will ask people to form 2 lines, one for people who wish to purchase books to be signed and one for people who are just waiting to have their books signed. Thank you so much for your attention, and now I'm going to hand it over to Shade.
Good evening. My name is Shade Samuelson, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this year's Gender Studies Symposium. I'm honored and excited to introduce someone who probably needs no introduction, Dr. Roxanne Gay, distinguished writer, professor, and feminist. Every year, the symposium strives to bring speakers from interdisciplinary backgrounds to discuss the intersections between gender, sexuality, and other systems of oppression. In considering this year's theme, Point of Access, the co-chairs, along with our incredible program director, Kim Brodkin, unanimously agreed that Dr. Gay would be the perfect person to address issues of access to and within feminism, academia, and social justice. No one can ignore how relevant and important a speaker like Roxanne Gay is in this particular political and social moment. When it can often feel as though the language surrounding oppression is itself alienating, we need someone like Roxanne Gay, whose refreshing yet devastatingly revealing humor invites us to examine assumptions about modern society and culture. As Dr. Gay writes, "I no longer want to believe these problems are too complex for us to make sense of them." I don't think I would be alone in saying that she is one of the most distinctive, approachable, and necessary voices today. As those of us who follow her loyally on Twitter can attest, she's been on tour since the beginning of the year, promoting her new book of short stories, Difficult Women, which you should definitely purchase next door in the pavilion after the talk if you're able to. We really appreciate Dr. Gay making the trip to be here with us tonight. Roxanne Gay is probably best known for her New York Times best-selling essay collection, Bad Feminist. In her words, her work is about creating new, more inclusive measures for literary excellence. Her essays explore topics often considered traditionally feminine, such as romance novels, soap operas, and reality television. And I know that a lot of us are probably wondering if she's going to let us in on who she thinks is going to win The Bachelor on Monday. She's a hilarious commentator and dedicated blogger on Tumblr, and even though our program director, Kim Brodkin, will probably never forgive me for this, she swears by Dr. Gay's review of Magic Mike XXL and reads it whenever she's having a bad day or feeling sad, and she also has never seen the movie. In addition to writing Bad Feminist and Difficult Women, Dr. Gay is also the author of the short story collection, Ayiti, the novel An Untamed State, and her forthcoming book, Hunger. She's an op-ed writer for the New York Times, an avid competitive Scrabble player, a professor of English, and one of the founders of Pank Magazine, a literary magazine fostering access to emerging and innovative poetry and prose. In Roxanne Gay's writing, she works to make feminism accessible. Her critiques of aspects of pop culture are both politically and culturally astute. Part of her broad appeal is in the way she's able to balance biting criticism with warmth and humor. She shows us that there's a way to balance our effort to rid the world of violence and injustice and also have fun. And Roxane Gay's writing is just that. She's hilarious and honest. She isn't afraid to be a difficult woman. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Roxane Gay.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be here in Portland, Oregon. It took me a minute. Like some days I don't know where I am and I have to look at the weather app on my phone and the very first screen will tell me where I am. But it's a real pleasure to be here, and Shade is correct. That review of Magic Mike XXL is the best thing I've ever written. Like, you know, fuck the books, whatever. Magic Mike XXL was just transcendent, and I think of it as a biblical text, really. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but in the movie, my husband, Channing, gets just the feeling of dance. He's in his workshop at home, and all of a sudden, Pony by Genuine starts playing. And when my husband feels the rhythm, he can't control himself. And so he starts grinding a piece of metal to the beat while thrusting his hips. And then he starts having sex with all of the furniture in the room. And when that happened, my soul left my body. And I finally understood why we take communion. It was just incredible. And by the end of the movie, the theater I was seeing it in, women were throwing dollar bills at the screen. And I mean, that's just talent. Like when you can, that's just talent. So I write stuff. In addition to writing about Magic Mike, I tend to write short stories, which is actually it's my first love, and it's the first thing I ever started writing. So I have a new book out called Difficult Women. So I thought I'd read a couple stories from Difficult Women and just have a conversation with you guys about anything, including Channing and his neck, but also current events, because there's a lot going on. Today has been a very interesting day. So oftentimes when I am interviewed about my fiction, interviewers ask me, what's the meaning or what was the inspiration? And what they really want is a very deep and profound answer about the inspiration. And so the story Open Marriage, I wrote it because I was watching a yogurt commercial for Activia with Jamie Lee Curtis. And I just watched that commercial and I thought, I want to be as happy as Jamie Lee Curtis eating this yogurt. And so I went to the grocery store and I bought some Activia, which I do not recommend. It is the most disgusting thing. It's like yogurt syrup. It's just disgusting. And it does exactly what the commercial says that it does. So if you're going to get on an airplane or leave your house in any way, just plan accordingly. Anyway, the first time I read this story, a woman in the audience threw up. So I was like, yes. So this is Open Marriage. We are having a heated debate about whether or not yogurt can expire when my husband suggests we stay together but see other people. He says open marriage intrigues him, that he couldn't be happier, but he read this article online this one time. I tell him yogurt cannot expire because it is filled with bacteria. I don't know if this is true, but I have seen commercials about yogurt that mention things like bacteria and the word probiotic, so I feel like I have a sufficient command of the topic. I give him a look. I say that he is welcome to try to find other women to sleep with, but I'm fine, and his face falls because he thinks I'm playing a trick on him. I'm not. He has no game, none at all. If I hadn't taken matters in hand, we would still be sitting on his couch in his bachelor apartment, his arms snaking around my shoulders with every yawn. I am not worried. He is the kind of man who gets ideas, but is largely unable to follow through on them. As we're talking, he shoves his hands into his jeans. This is something he does often, wearing right through the pockets of most of his pants. He leans against the kitchen counter. He says he wants cultivating an open marriage to be something we do together. I politely decline once more. I say, I'm not inclined to open up my half of the marriage, which only confuses him further because I'm quick-tempered and what he calls feisty, which means I talk back to him and give him roadhead every once in a while. And I am the first woman who has ever done this in his very limited experience. So it's still something of a novelty. It's still something that requires terminology. I take a bite of the yogurt that started our scientific debate. It expired more than 4 months ago, but it appears edible. When I dip my spoon into the container, the yogurt gives way easily. It tastes very sour. My husband's face is red and sweat beads on his upper lip. He asks if I would seriously be fine with him having no strings attached sex with another woman, and I say, yes, baby, of course. He tells me I'm amazing in bed, that it's not about being unsatisfied, and I say, yes, baby, of course. I rock his world on the regular, and we both know it. He can barely string 3 words together after we make love. He just lies there trying to catch his breath, muttering, God damn, over and over. I say, good luck, and be safe, and don't you break my heart, baby. Don't you break my heart. His eyes widen. I eat the entire container of yogurt, even going so far as to scrape the sides of the container until it is clean. I vocalize my appreciation for the expired yogurt and do a lot of elaborate spoon licking. I hold my husband's gaze the entire time. He was a virgin when we first met. He looks away first. So, if you ever have your partner come to you and say, I would like an open relationship, just go to the yogurt. Thank you. As a total aside, does anyone here watch The Bachelor? Did you guys notice how Raven kept talking about her ex-boyfriend who didn't make her orgasm? I was just like, girl, yes. Don't stop. And so my question is that man in witness protection now? Because everybody in the world knows that he can't make a woman come. And I think that's awesome. I mean, it just, it helps to know sometimes, so you don't waste your time. And so now every woman in his town can just be like, no thanks. Anyway, about 17 years ago, my parents moved to Naples, Florida, and they moved into a gated community. And we're from Nebraska, where people live in neighborhoods like normal people. And we were just like, what is this gated community thing? Because everybody in Florida lives in a gated community. Even the shitty neighborhoods are in gated communities, as if the gates are just keeping the shitty in. And so I was just really interested in these sort of intentional communities and the kinds of people that choose to live in them. And so this is a series of vignettes called Florida. 3333 Palmetto Crest Circle. The adjustment had been uncomfortable. All her life, Marcy had lived in the Midwest with people who ate red meat and starchy foods, who allowed their bodies to spread without shame. And then her husband was transferred to Naples. Marcy's mother said, Naples, like in Italy? And Marcy said, no, Florida. And her mother said, oh, dear. The women in Naples all looked the same, lean and darkly tan, their faces narrow with hunger discipline, whittled by the same surgeon. They stared at Marcy's relatively ample physique with disgust or envy or something between the two. At night, Marcy worried about her ass and thighs. Her husband always said, baby, you are perfect, and she flushed angrily. His reassurances were so reflexive as to be insulting. In Omaha, they lived in a neighborhood, In Naples, they moved into a gated community, Palmetto Landing, where each estate was blandly unique and sprawling. The first time they drove up to the gatehouse, manned by a white-haired gentleman in polyester, Marcy leaned forward to study the landscaping, tall cypresses encircled by Peruvian lilies looming over the guardhouse. She sighed and said, "This is a bit much." Her husband said, "Baby, people love the illusion of safety and the spectacle of enclosure." They were given barcoded stickers for their cars. Their community had a country club. They joined because the transfer came with a promotion and a raise. Marcy's husband said it was important to live up to their new station. He mostly wanted to play golf with men whose bellies were fatter than his. In Palmetto Landing, the men's bodies expanded in inverse proportion to those of their wives. Each morning, there was a group fitness class at the clubhouse. Spinning, Zumba, kickboxing, always something different. The instructor was a young, aggressively fit woman, Caridad. The other wives loved to say her name, trilling their R's to show Caridad, "Ellas hablan español." Marcy stood in the back of the studio in sweatpants and an old t-shirt of her husband's, while the women around her perspired in their perfectly coordinated outfits that were fancier than most of Marcy's wardrobe. Marcy enjoyed the pleasant soreness as she drove the 2 blocks home after each class. She liked how, for an hour, there was a precise set of instructions she was meant to follow, a clear sense of direction. The other wives were quietly fascinated by Marcy in that she was a rare species in the wealthy enclave, a first wife. Ellen Katz, who lived 3 doors down, often squeezed Marcy's shoulder with her cool, bony hand. She'd say, "We're rooting for you, kid," and offered words of encouragement as Marcy's figure slimmed. Marcy never knew what to say during these moments, but she smiled politely because she understood these people and how they existed only in relation to those around them. 4411 Palmetto Pines Way. At first, news of the brothel was only a rumor. Men would rush into and out of the spa in Palmetto Landing at all hours, often looking harried on the way in and very relaxed on the way out, but we had no proof. Then Evelyn Marshall caught her husband getting a blowjob. She was getting a hot stone massage when she heard a familiar groan from an adjacent room. News spread through our small community quickly, but no one alerted the authorities. We felt important having such goings-on in our midst. In the afternoon, the therapists often sit on the large lanai behind the spa in negligees and peignoirs and heavy makeup, smoking and drinking bright-colored, fruity drinks, waiting for their next clients. My front balcony looks out onto this lanai where the ladies lounge. They are not as beautiful as you might imagine, but they are interesting and they talk loudly. They never seem to sweat despite the humidity. Their voices are deep and velvety in the way of women who know things. I sit on my balcony most afternoons wearing a pair of dark sunglasses. I hold a book in my lap and pretend to read. One of the women who works at the spa is very tall, the kind of tall in a woman that makes people stare. She has long dark hair she always wears down. She is beautiful, and I love looking at her, how she moves, the anger in her eyes. She caught me staring once, stood up, her robe falling open. She lifted a leg and propped it on the railing and pointed between her thighs, then threw her hands in the air. I did not stop staring, and she did not close her legs. I went to see her. The woman at the desk studied me carefully. She said, "Nadia is one of our special therapists. She charges high fees." I said, "I know." The receptionist shrugged. Soon after, I was escorted into the back. I heard interesting sounds. Nadia had a thick Russian accent but spoke English well. "You want massage, candles, what?" she asked. I said, "I want to fuck." The words felt heavy and strange in my mouth. Nadia cocked her head to the side. "You are different," she said. Later, her tongue was cool and soft between my thighs. I twisted my fingers through her hair, resting my heels on her back. I wanted to explain myself. It took me a long time to come, it always does, but Nadia was patient. I reciprocated her attentions. I was not afraid. As I was leaving, I ran into my next-door neighbor. She pulled her purse closer to her body and looked away. I pressed my hand against my neighbor's shoulder as we passed. She still refused to look at me, but she leaned into my touch. Now, Nadia stares at me when she's on her lanai and I am up on my balcony. I don't look away. My husband calls me a wildcat. After we make love, he always whistles under his breath and slaps my thigh and says, "Woman, one of these days you are going to kill me." On our wedding day, my mother pulled me aside at the chapel. I was only half dressed, walking around in white pantyhose, a corset, and white patent leather heels. My dress was a monstrosity of satin and chiffon, and I wanted to wear it for as little time as possible. We stood in a dark vestibule, and my mother began straightening my curls, pulling them from my face, messing with the headband holding my hair back. She said, "Look, baby, there is no mystery to keeping a man." She dabbed at my lipstick with a tissue she had been holding folded in the palm of her hand. She said, "You do whatever sick thing he wants, whenever he wants, and you will never have a problem." That was the only advice my mother has ever given me. She and my father divorced when I was 9. Thank you. Thank you. I asked my parents not to read that book, but they don't listen to me. And then they get what they get. So I also write nonfiction and have thoughts and opinions about almost everything. My opinions have opinions. And so I've been thinking a lot lately, especially since November, about this moment that we're in, because we hear a lot of conversation about this moment. And what's interesting is that the way people talk about this moment is as if we're all encountering the same moment, but we're not. And so these are just some thoughts that I have about this age of American disgrace. On Tuesday, November 8th, 2016, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. I spent the evening watching election returns, and with each passing hour, the hope of Hillary Clinton as our first woman president faded a little more. But I still held on to some hope because that was far easier than facing reality. Although I don't think of myself as an idealist, I could not allow myself to believe that a man like Trump could be elected. I didn't even think that he was going to garner the Republican nomination. For some foolish reason, I believed that there were enough people across the country who believed in social progress and the greater good to overcome those who, for whatever reason, bought into Trump's harmful rhetoric. I am stunned, even now. I am ashamed of being so stunned and so unprepared to face this American reality. The morning after the election, my mother called and I ignored my phone because it was 7 a.m. and according to Haitian parents, if you're in bed at 7 a.m., you've wasted the entire day. I knew she was also calling to check in on me. I knew she was worried because we had spoken throughout election night, and I was taking it really hard because with each passing hour, I was watching all those little gizmos on CNN that were predicting the outcome, and I just thought perhaps technology is finally failing us. Alas, it did not. A few minutes later, she texted me, "The sun is shining today, Miss America, and we are alive, still together, and definitely stronger. Wake up." I did not want to wake up, or I wished I was experiencing a nightmare and could wake up in the world that we lived in on November 7th. An imperfect world, to be sure, but a world where a reality star who goes by Cittadini was not the president-elect. I did not want to wake up in a world where suddenly everything became precarious for far too many people. On Wednesday, I went about my day. I had to accept that the world was not coming to an end, even though it felt that way. I did media interviews, even though I had no idea what to say. I had no way of making sense of the incomprehensible. What do we do next? I was asked time and again, and what I wanted to say was, I have no fucking idea. I couldn't because you're not allowed to curse on the radio. While I was running errands, the sun was indeed shining. The air was crisp, a perfect fall day. People were out living their lives. At my gym, everyone bantered as they usually do. The woman who works at the dry cleaner smiled and wished me a good day as she usually does, and I wished her a good day as I usually do. Life went on, or at least it seemed that way. I kept wanting to scream, "Don't you know what's going on?" And at the same time, because I live in a fairly small town in Indiana, I looked at each and every person and thought, "You probably voted for Donald Trump. How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" In 2016, I did not write a lot about the presidential campaign, and I regret that now. I wanted to, but I did not have the words to express my support and admiration for Hillary Clinton, or to express my frustration with the narrow field of candidates the Democrats offered, or to express my horror at the shit show that was the Republican field of candidates, and how they consistently overcame very shallow expectations. Now, though, I'm not so much interested in relitigating the election. What happened, happened, and now we must face reality. I am interested instead in figuring out where we go from here. I am interested in figuring out how we survive this age of American disgrace. And let us be clear, to call what is currently happening a disgrace is my way of being exceedingly polite. Less than a month into his presidency, Trump had already set into motion an executive order to build a wall between the United States and Mexico. He tried to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, and he lied repeatedly. He has spent the past, 4 weekends at his Florida estate, where he has discussed matters of national and international security with no regard for actual security. He has tried to ban Muslims from entering the country, including green card holders. He has ordered ICE raids on undocumented immigrants, specifically targeting sanctuary cities. His former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, had to resign because Flynn discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador and then lied to Vice President Mike Pence. Flynn, if you missed it, led a vigorous chant of "lock her up" during the presidential campaign because, Hillary Clinton and these emails. Throughout the campaign, I did think about language, even though I didn't write. And I thought about how careless we got with the words we used. I thought about language because I'm a writer, and words are how I make sense of the world and my place in it. There were all kinds of pithy catchphrases that became very popular. Michelle Obama said, "They go low, we go high." And for a woman in her position, that made sense. She was beholden to the role of First Lady, and she was right in her belief that sometimes there is no need to sink lower than your opponent. But millions of people went on to parrot these words with no understanding of the world and how it really works. Too many people were and are invested in this idea of ideological purity and infallibility to realize that there is no purity when fighting everything Donald Trump represents. There is no high road with a man who appointed a white supremacist as his chief strategist. When they go low, we have to be willing to go way lower if we have any hope of resisting their greedy, shallow, and insular brand of fascism. The phrase "love trumps hate" was equally loathsome because that is in fact rarely the case, and in saying that over and over, people were literally centering Trump. Language matters, and sometimes it becomes an empty container for whatever bullshit people want to fill it with. Go high, Trump hate, be nasty, wear a pantsuit. The election results prove that love does not trump hate, not at all. As catchy as it sounds, I am not a nasty woman because there is no reclamation in how Trump sees women. And while pantsuits are a charming and fashionable rallying outfit, they are not going to get us to the promised land. I don't begrudge people who found comfort or solidarity in these words and ideas, but goddamn, we needed to do better then, and we need to do better now. We need to get uncomfortable, and that means moving beyond tidy words that make us feel like the world is a better, more unified place than it actually is. Those of us who are in the crosshairs of a Trump presidency are devastated, but our eyes are wide open, especially as the good white folk who voted for Clinton keep centering their whiteness every chance they get. They are ashamed of their country, and they keep voicing this shame, but I don't want your shame. I want your fight. I want to hear your voices rising above the din. Not enough people with visible platforms are facing the ugly truth of what happened in this election. The majority of white men and white women voted for Trump. Some feminists are shocked that white women would value their whiteness over their womanhood, but people of color are not surprised. The precedent for this can be traced back to slavery. What we're seeing are American racism and xenophobia and misogyny on full display. Voters can deny reality all they want, but with a vote for Trump, they consented to everything he stands for. They now have to live with the discomfort of facing themselves for who they really are or what they're willing to tolerate. What is reaped must now be sown. I have also been thinking about the phrase identity politics, which is always used to dismiss the concerns and lived experiences of marginalized people. It's used to derail conversations about how identity affects the ways in which we move through the world. Identity politics is an accusation that implies that we can somehow separate ourselves from the very things that contribute to who we are. It implies that we can't both acknowledge and embrace our identities and also be part of a broader community. We're going to be hearing that phrase a lot in the coming years as marginalized people vocalize why a Trump presidency is terrifying, and those who don't get it try to look the other way or absolve themselves of how they are complicit in everything that comes next. I am a Black bisexual woman. I am Haitian American. I'm a Libra. I grew up middle class and then upper middle class. I'm fat. I'm a very lapsed Catholic. My identity is political because so much of who I am is part of the public discourse, subject to legislation, subject to discrimination and disadvantage. Clearly, this is not the entirety of my life or who I am. Don't get me wrong, I've actually got it really good. In fact, the work I do is not for myself, really. It's for the people who don't have the privileges I do, who need someone to stand and speak and fight for them and with them. That is how I think of using my freedom to speak, and that is how I think about sanctuary. Every month, and especially during February and March, I am invited to various events with a vague mandate to speak on diversity. And yes, that word becomes an empty container that people also fill with whatever bullshit that they want. Basically, I'm invited to talk to and teach white people about things that are largely very easy to figure out. I, like many people of color, am asked for solutions that I had no I'm asked for solutions to problems that I had no hand in creating. I will be honest, I am so very tired of talking about diversity. I am so tired of the assumption that as a Black woman, I somehow have access to some magical Negro wisdom about how to make the world a better, more inclusive place. I do not. The word diversity has, as of late, become so overused as to be entirely meaningless. In a 2015 article for the New York Times Magazine, Anna Holmes wrote about the dilution of this word, attributing its loss of meaning to a combination of overuse, imprecision, inertia, and self-serving intentions. The word diversity is, in its most imprecise uses, a placeholder for issues of inclusion, retention, recruitment, and representation. Diversity is a problem seemingly without solutions. We talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and nothing much ever seems to change. This is another way in which we are careless with language, as if by simply saying the word diversity, we're somehow doing something or creating actual change. That's not at all how it works. Change requires intent and effort and material support, which in most cases is robust and long-term financial commitment. And always change requires a little or a lot of imagination, a willingness to think differently, react differently, and act differently. And so I've also been thinking about allies. I think about quite a lot. I am done with allyship, particularly when the term ally is used as a noun rather than a verb. I am done with allowing ourselves the comfortable distance provided by allyship. I will not allow myself that comfortable distance anymore. We can't afford it. The challenges that marginalized people are facing today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future have to be taken on by all of us as personal. We have to fight for and with each other. Since November, people have asked me to make sense of what happened and have asked me about what we do next, and I am still looking for those answers, but I am looking. I know that we have to fight, even if I don't know what that fight looks like. I know that we need sanctuary more than ever. I know that we need to raise our voices and keep them raised so that we are heard. I still need time to hurt and rage, but I recognize that we can't do nothing. I'm thinking about the ways in which we as everyday citizens can participate in our local elections this year and the midterms next year, and of course the 2020 presidential election. I'm thinking about ways in which we can more effectively prioritize our social justice and economic justice. I'm thinking about how we must continue to protest. We cannot become fatigued. We need to strengthen our communities by understanding where strength among us is most needed. We need to run for office. We need to be disciplined and well organized, and we need a whole lot of money. We need to protect ourselves and each other. When we use our words, we have to do so with care and intent. I have to believe that we will get through this and not only survive, but thrive. It is a fragile hope, but despite everything, I need to hold on to a little hope. I need to be able to breathe. I need to believe that there is grace beyond disgrace. Thank you. So I love to do Q&As because I find that that's a way of generating really interesting conversations. And so I am happy to take questions from the microphones there. Well, this one's going to go in the middle. And there's also one over there. And just make sure you have an actual question. No, because sometimes people get up there and I'm like, what you need is a blog.
Firstly, thank you for being here. It's great to have you. And thank you to the co-chairs and Kim for making my Black girl dreams come true. Woo. Yeah, it'll work. Thanks, Kim. So my question for you is, if you've gotten a chance to listen to Nicki Minaj and Remy Ma's current feminist discourse, and I know people are laughing, but I really mean it seriously, and my question's around, how can we take seriously to Black femme rappers and not, laugh at them when it's mentioned in an academic space? How can we, in thinking about the theme of access, how can we take them seriously as two feminists engaging in really important dialogue around representation? And Remy's diss track used the instrumental of Nas, and so I think that made me think a lot about access. So have you gotten a chance to listen to it? Yeah. That's my question.
I listened to Sheether, all 8 minutes of it, and Remy was like, I am going to enunciate every single word, and you are going to know exactly how I feel about Miss Nicki Minaj. What? Oh, and I listened to part of the other one, the new one, Frauds, No Frauds. And first of all, Nicki waited too long. It's too late, the ship has sailed. If you can't come up, you're a rapper. You're this is your job. You're supposed to be able to rejoinder immediately. And she did not. So, but I think that we have, the question is, we have to take them seriously because this is really interesting to see women engaged in rap battling, which is something that has always been the purview of men. And not only are they engaged in it, but the level is good, it's high. I thought that Sheether was incredible. It went on too long. It was like, girl, we get it. You can cut this out. But, I think that these kinds of things actually create more access because I think now more women artists are going to feel like, yes, I can get in the mix this way. What's interesting is that they're kind of there are not a lot of women MCs right now in the game. And it's odd. And what's also odd is that they are both still heavily backed by men. Remy Ma doesn't go anywhere without Fat Joe and doesn't do anything without Fat Joe, as if he's providing legitimacy for her. And then Nicki had Drake, which, whatever. And I'm like, that's mistake one. How are you going to have a comeback with Drake on it? And then she also had Lil Wayne on there. And so again, she was sort of using male legitimacy in this engagement with another woman. And so I think that was interesting. So there's a lot there, but I think we have to take it seriously. And anyone who wouldn't take it seriously, doesn't really understand what's happening and doesn't understand context and is just not a good person.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm kind of boring myself with this question, but what do you make of fake news, especially as it nudges ordinary people sitting at home in front of their computers?
Yeah, the fake news thing is fucking exhausting. I just don't even know. It's really interesting how quickly our vernacular can change in this country, because last year, fake news just started entering the vernacular, and now everyone's using it as a punchline. They're using it to just talk about, fake news is now becoming synonymous with lies. It's just all very odd. You know, but there is a danger to actual fake news, and I think there's a danger to how ubiquitous the term is becoming. You can't use the term fake news for anything that you disagree with or anything that's, you know, a lie. Fake news is a very specific phenomenon of people creating false news stories to control the political narrative. And I think we need to be very specific about fake news and how we refer to it. Otherwise, it becomes diluted, and the people at home who are not media literate and who believe fake news and who don't know that a fake news site is a fake news site are increasingly, you know, they're ever more susceptible to what's going on there. And so I think we have to be a lot more careful with how we talk about fake news, because right now it's just out of control. Yes, hi.
Hi. So I'm a pretty avid Twitter follower of yours. And I was watching your live tweet of the Oscars, and so I wanted to get your live in-person reactions of the Oscars this year, especially with the craziness of the end.
Oh, so you just want me to talk about that? Okay.
I mean, it's not really a question. It's just I mean, I know you really wanted Moonlight to win, and I know you really wanted Denzel to win, but...
Yeah, well, no, I could take or leave Denzel. I think Denzel overacted in Fences. I thought Viola deserved Best Actress, and I was disappointed but she agreed to be put up for Best Supporting Actress, because I think everyone in Hollywood knew that Emma Stone was going to get Best Actress. And if I were Viola, I wouldn't want to lose to Emma Stone. Emma Stone's, she seems delightful. I like her, but Viola is on a whole other level of craft. And so I would have just smacked somebody. So I get what Viola did there. You know, the Oscars are interesting, and I do enjoy watching awards shows because, A, I want an Oscar, but I also enjoy spectacle and the pomp and circumstance. And so this year's Oscars was particularly interesting because it was a fairly good year in terms of diversity, if we think of diversity in an extremely narrow way, black and white. And I think hopefully what this year will do is open the conversation to where are the movies featuring Latinos, and where are the movies featuring Asian people and South Asian people and Pacific Islanders. Other than Moana, we had like one. We have to stop being so narrow in our conversation, but at the end, with what happened with Moonlight, that was just a travesty of such, you know, I mean, it's a travesty in terms of, it's not like the world is coming to an end, but it's also still a problem. And I was just stunned. And then the way in which people were applying the white savior narrative to what the producer from La La Land did, which I thought, and I even said on Twitter, what he did was gracious and lovely, but I don't think that we needed to write entire news articles about it. I feel like 140 characters was sufficient thanks. And the media did not agree, and so that was interesting. So yeah, the Oscars this year were interesting, but I love to live tweet. It's just fun. And just to read everyone else's opinions and talk about the dresses, and there were just some odd choices in terms of the dresses. And Damien LaChazelle, his upper lip hair, I can't. I wanted to just run on stage and just you know, just shave it a little bit, just a lot. Just take it off. It doesn't make you look older. Stop. Just you're gonna look 10. Just deal with it. What's your question? Oh.
I'm wondering what you think about the connection between academics and activism. Oftentimes, I feel like what's going on in reality and what's studied in an academic sphere, like in an institution, is different, but both are very valuable. And if you have a thought of the role of academics, especially in the next few years.
It depends on the academic. I think academics with the protection of tenure need to be leading activist efforts. I think that unfortunately like 60% of the professoriate is vulnerable and can't. And so it's not a simple question. At many institutions, adjunct faculty are the majority, but they are in a very precarious position where they're working on contracts, if not from semester to semester, they're working from year to year. So it's challenging. But I do think we need to see more faculty who are in a position to be politically active become more politically active. We don't see a lot of activism in academia in certain fields. We do see it in the humanities, I think. Most of the humanities professors I've ever met have an activist streak that runs deep. In the sciences, not so much, because they're all about, rationalism and facts and so on, as if we don't deal with these things in the humanities. It's weird. I don't know what they think we do, but it's a challenge though, because there's a certain amount of privilege that comes with being in academia, and I think oftentimes you forget that. And people in academia, you do what you do based on how you were trained, and so many of us were trained in a very specific canonical way that does not privilege activism. And I think that's why we see that split between what happens in the academy and what happens in activist circles. But when I look at my own teaching, so I was originally teaching my fiction workshop this semester as a novel writing workshop. And then after the election, on November 8th, I was just sitting around, or November 9th, I guess, I was sitting around and I was like, I can't just teach a novel writing workshop and just like read some sad novels about divorces. I can't do it. And so I'm teaching writing the political novel and making my students engage with politics, because creative writers love to indulge in the fantasy that we can separate politics from art. And I disabuse my students of that every day. And so I think that there are ways in which we can start to do that, where we incorporate forms of activism in our curriculum. Thank you. Yes.
My understanding of A Lot of Bad Feminist, the book that you wrote in 2014, was about finding place to accept things that are not necessarily feminist or don't jive with your political leanings, but still enjoying them. You also wrote about how you used to date a lot of libertarians, and my goal for starting from November 8th was to never fuck a Republican. And but the problem is that that also goes to interpersonal relationships, where there are people in my family that don't necessarily agree with me politically, and they also disagree with me politically in ways that erases parts of my identity. So I was wondering if you had anything to say about that kind of relationship, where it's someone that you love and finding space in your heart for someone that doesn't really find space for who you are.
Yeah, I wish I had an easy answer. It's really hard. After the election, I was just like, it's time to cut them off. Like, we can't, like, these are not people who think that we deserve to live as queer people. How do you have a rational discussion? But it's easier said than done. It is easier said than done. I have actually a Republican brother. He did not vote for Trump. To be clear, he's black. But he's a Republican, which is weird because he's black. And we stopped talking for several months because I was just like, how on earth could you be a Republican and be conservative in this world? He's socially liberal, but everything else is not so much. And so I had to really just remember that he is my brother, and that is an indelible bond. And so what we have been able to do is just try and really listen to each other. And it's not easy, but we have conversations where I do try to hear him out on fiscal conservatism, and it's nonsense, but I try. I try very hard. And I will say, to his credit, he tries very hard to listen to me. It really just comes down to listening and being willing to listen and being open, and also recognizing that you might just have to agree to disagree. The challenge is that so many of the issues that we're dealing with, we can't agree to disagree. Like, we cannot agree to disagree about equality and civil rights. We can, like this bathroom bill situation that we're seeing that is so rampant across the country. Like, that's not an agree to disagree thing. This is about human dignity. And so that's the challenge. And I think what we do in these cases is try and make it clear that we are talking about matters of human dignity to the people who may not see us or accept us as we are and who are politically opposed, but we still love them. And just say, like, you bring it to this idea of dignity and just having the right to be human and to be safe. And some people will hear that. Some people won't. And when people won't hear that, then they cannot be reached. And that's when it comes to a place of having to make a very difficult decision. You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
So you obviously have, like, in some ways, a very hardline stance on people who, not very hardline, but like stance on people who are, like, disregard your identity and stuff like that. But I was wondering on your opinion on nonviolence versus violent protest, because I just saw the documentary I Am Not Your Negro from the works of James Baldwin, and in it, Baldwin talks about Martin Luther King, and he talks about how Martin Luther King is like the white people's activist, and it's what the activists, the white people, want because he's nonviolent, and he doesn't, like, demand their respect, technically. That's kind of his words. And so I was wondering on your opinion on that.
Opinions on violence versus nonviolence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the current day and, like, in different movements.
I think James Baldwin was, I think James Baldwin is brilliant, and I agree with him on many things, but I also think that he fundamentally misunderstands Martin Luther King Jr. and misrepresents Martin Luther King Jr. to sort of support his own argument. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in nonviolence, but he did not believe in passivity. And he is not the passive black man that white people have turned him into over the past 30 years. And so nonviolence doesn't mean passivity. It means we're not going to take things to a place of doing physical harm to one another. But I think of what happened in Berkeley recently when Milo Yiannopoulos went to speak there, which, what? Have you heard of Berkeley? I mean, of all the schools, like, just Berkeley, it was never going to happen, my friend. And the students started protesting and throwing Molotov cocktails, and people were, like, really just getting all freaked out, like, oh my God, it's getting violent. That's actually, they were being destructive for a purpose, and I think that's totally fine. I think that's necessary. It got the job done. You know, people have a really odd understanding of revolution as this quaint and tidy thing. That's not how change happens. You have to get in people's faces. I think for me, nonviolent means that we are not going to physically harm one another. But if a CVS gets hurt in the process, well, that's just fine. Because CVS is not a person, and it does not have feelings. So, yeah, and there are people that disagree and certainly are, like, take nonviolence to another level, and I respect that, but I am not a Buddhist.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Regarding your book, How to Be Heard, which made news when you dropped it, you dropped the book deal with Simon & Schuster when they signed Milo Yiannopoulos. Beyond creating a separate platform for your voice, what do you recommend to young people who are attempting to combat this new strain of far-right ideology?
That's a great question. You know, I think you have to, I don't know how we combat it, honestly, because it's so attractive to so many angry young people. And I think one of the key things is that it's about entitlement, and that we have to start having very frank conversations about entitlement in this country. Because entitlement, I think, is also what led to Donald Trump being elected. A lot of people really believe that they deserve the American dream without recognizing that if you're alive in America, and you have a roof over your head, that is the American dream. And a lot of young people that feel disenfranchised and are gravitating to these alt-right movements don't recognize that it doesn't get better than this. You're a white guy. Like, this is it. Like, and if you can't make that work, I just don't know. Like, I mean, and that's the thing. They don't want to hear that. And so they gravitate to these people like Milo and Richard Spencer, who make them feel like, yes, there is a promised land if we could all just go to Idaho and hang out. And Idaho's a wonderful place. I have been there. It's gorgeous. But there are parts of Idaho where I would not go. And so I think we just have to have franker conversations about entitlement. And, what these people seem to really want is socialism without recognizing it. Like, there are programs where everybody can have a lot. And it's called socialism, but they don't want to hear that. And so I think it's about really addressing entitlement.
Hi, I'm a reasonably new writer, and you mentioned that you're teaching a class about the political novel, writing a political novel. And I'm just wondering, for the rest of us that can't take that class, what ways we can combine activism and writing right now, because I'm not sure how to do that.
Yeah, a lot of times people think that to be political as a writer means that you have to take on a very specific agenda, and that like every word on every page has to be like rah, 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 damn the man. And to write, I think, as a person of color, to write as a woman, to write as a queer person, to write as a trans person, these are things that are inherently political because literacy was denied to us for so long. And I also think that people need to understand what political means. And whenever you write about the state of this world, and when you write about culture and social issues, you are engaging in political fiction. And so what I'm trying to teach my students this semester is to broaden their understanding of what it means to be political, and to recognize that the artistic and the political can coincide. That you can comment, for example, I have a student who is writing a novel about a soldier who comes back from Afghanistan, and he's really wanting to critique the military because he's a former soldier. And so we're talking about ways in which he can do that critique by highlighting the realities of what it's like to come back to the United States and rejoin society after being in a very rigid environment and a very disciplined environment like the military. And I have another student who's writing about identity and race and what happens when you decide to eschew labels. And so I'm just letting students understand that it can be about really anything. It's just a question of prioritizing craft as much as you prioritize the political. And make sure that you're saying something that hasn't been said or that is offering some insight that perhaps our culture is in grave need of. And so we read as much as we write in my fiction workshops. And so we're reading The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. And these are all, I think, beautiful, flawed political novels where they can look and see the ways in which writers engage in politics and the social realm, but also are creating just masterful works of fiction. And so oftentimes it's not that you have to have an agenda or a checklist. It's that you have to engage with the world and say something about the world that only you can say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm a
black person.
Can you hear me?
Hi.
I'm a artist at my local high school, and I want to pursue a career in comics or being a cartoonist. And I was wondering if you had any advice on integrating politics into fantasy in a way that pushes boundaries and that's unapologetic, but also doesn't discourage viewers from allowing people of all ages to interpret my message.
Yeah, I think that Ta-Nehisi Coates' current run of Black Panther is an excellent example of blending politics and art in the comic book form. And there's so much happening on every page. It's really about revolution and change. And, you know, pretty much anything you're going to do is going to be age appropriate. Children are sophisticated. And it's okay to engage children in politics and in thinking about social change and revolution. Children know more than we give them credit for. And so I wouldn't worry so much about age appropriateness. Age appropriateness in the comic book industry is really about sex. That's what they're afraid of. They're not afraid of violence. They're not afraid of tackling themes like, for example, Black Lives Matter. They're really just afraid of sex. And so just find the story that you want to tell and just tell it. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering, you were talking about how during the election you didn't write as much because you didn't feel like you had, maybe, I don't know, had the words to write it yet.
I'm sorry, that microphone is really weird.
I'm
it's
really
not
quiet,
you.
I'm sorry.
No, that microphone is really, the sound is distorted. Can you maybe use that microphone? Because that one works.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering, because you were talking about how during the election you didn't feel, or you didn't write as much, partially I think because maybe you didn't know the words to use or how to write it. And I was wondering, as a writer, how you kind of coordinate wanting to write about political things, but not knowing how to, and especially when it feels so pressing in the moment, and wanting to be present and speaking in that moment, but not knowing exactly how to.
You know, it's challenging. I didn't write a lot about the election last year, mostly because I was exhausted. And what I mean by that is that when I write my columns for the New York Times, the level of harassment I receive increases by a factor of 100. It's so frustrating. And I knew that if I dared to speak Hillary's name, it was going to be all hell breaks loose. But when it comes to writing politically, I really wait until I feel the fire and where I feel like I have to say something. So after the Charleston murders in South Carolina and Dylan Roof, after I read a story about a young girl in Cleveland, Texas that was gang raped, after something happens that just seems so horrific, Jerry Sandusky and what he did and how Joe Paterno enabled his abuse of young boys for so long, I get the fire, and that's when I know I have to say something. I also always ask myself, what can I say that matters and that no one else is saying? And I also ask myself, would it be better for me to speak in this situation, or would it be better for me to turn to others and learn? And I think that's a really important question for anyone who wants to write about their opinions and wants to write nonfiction in the political realm, needs to be able to ask and answer, because you shouldn't think yourself an expert on everything simply because you have an opinion. And we see that all the time. There is so much work out there that is just so bad, and it's just so, you know, someone who's desperately writing just to generate. And so you have to really care, you have to really feel, and you have to know that you have something to offer to the conversation that nobody else can. And you have to, so that's really for me the measure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thank you so much for differentiating Asians and South Asians. That's just, thank you.
You're welcome.
So
I mean, you know.
I'm an international student here, so I'm from India. I'm Indian. That's Indian. So I'm going to pick this up. Forget it. My question was that during the whole election thing, and even now, as a person who is not a citizen but is still living in this country, I cannot vote. I do not understand enough of the political system to say too much about it. And there are only so many Facebook statuses you can make until you start feeling like you're screaming at a wall, half of which agrees with you, the other half is not listening. And I was wondering what can be done about that, or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think your position is unique, and there are many people in your position right now wondering, what do I do when I can't influence the current political situation with my vote? But what you can do is volunteer. And I think that's one of the best things that any of us can do right now is volunteer with community organizations, whether it's registering people to vote, ironically enough, or helping people, volunteering at citizenship training organizations, volunteering at shelters, food banks, anywhere. These are organizations that are going to see a sharp decrease in federal funding over the next 4 years and are going to need support, and I think that's one of the best political statements that you can make. Also, I think it's important, even though you're not a citizen, just to pay attention, to read, and to be engaged. You're allowed to have opinions. You're a citizen of the world, and I think just staying informed, and you seem incredibly informed, so you're well on the path to, you're doing what you need to be doing.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much.
Hi. Okay, in this time right now, I struggle a lot with finding a way to kind of validate my own opinions and, have opinions that I think are worth sharing. So I was just wondering how you validate your own opinions and how you get the confidence to, send your message out there.
Yeah, the thing is, the number one email I get is from people who say, I would like to send you, or they don't even ask, they just send me their work and say, am I good enough to make it? And I can't answer, well, A, I don't have enough time, but B, I can't give you that validation. It's hard. As a writer, I tend to be generally insecure, and you still have to find a way to have a gut belief in yourself and your voice while also being profoundly insecure. And so what I just tell myself is, and I tell myself this almost every day when I'm writing nonfiction, nobody can narrate the world the way I can. And what that means is that I'm an individual, and I have a background and a culture, and these things shape how I see the world. I have various identity markers that shape how I see the world. And so I try to think of what makes me unique, and I try to take that a step further when I'm writing and make sure that what I'm putting on the page doesn't sound like anything anyone else is doing. And that's where I find the confidence, where it may not be perfect, it may be very raw, but I know that nobody else can do what Roxane Gay is doing. And you have to find that way to believe that nobody else can do. You don't need to validate your opinions. Your opinions are your opinions. And I see this from young women quite a lot, where they feel like they need some sort of imprimatur on their opinions. But if you have that opinion, it's valid. Unless, of course, it's a really weird opinion, like, I don't like if you said, I don't like the Fast and Furious movies, I would just be like, that's an invalid opinion. Get out. Other than that, in general, your opinions are valid. What your challenge is as a writer is that you need to show the reader why your opinions are valid by supporting your argument well and thinking about what your audience is going to need to get on board with you. And so it's all in the work. You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Over the past few months, I've heard a few different people say that while they totally feel that people should express their gender in any way they like, whichever pronouns that they like, they have a problem with the use of they, them, because their mind is very grammar-oriented. And I, personally don't really think that that's the real reason for that, but it's kind of hard to, have a conversation with them about such issues if they're set on the idea that it's simply because it's having to do with the grammar, it's having to do with something that's unrelated. And I was just wondering how you think we should respond to these types of objections.
You don't. I mean, well, no. you do have a response, which is, would you really deny someone their dignity and right to be identified correctly because of grammar? Like, who the fuck are you? Come on. Literally, I mean, again, another common question I get is like people wanting to know, how do I reach someone who has a stupid opinion? You don't. You really don't. And I think it's such a cop-out. I've heard, and I'm 42, and so I grew up in a very different time where there were two genders, and that was it. And my birth certificate is pink, and my brother's birth certificate is blue. And it takes time to adjust, but we have to get on board. This is reality. This is the world. And people who are holding on to, oh, that's grammatically incorrect, are the same people who don't understand that language is flexible, that language evolves, and the same kinds of people who have denied multiliteracies and code switching. And so you just put them in their place and make them read.
Thank you.
I'm tall.
Me
Hi.
too. Hi.
First, I want to say thank you because I am feeling extremely grateful to be able to hear you speak and that you are in Oregon and Portland, and yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So my question is about your upcoming book, Hunger, and I've immersed myself essentially in fat politics in the last year, and one, I'd love to hear whatever you have to tell us about the book coming out, and also what are your go-tos in taking care of yourself as you navigate the world?
Yes. My next book, which comes out in June, which I am still finishing. Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad right now. It's bad. The book is written. To be clear, the book is done, but I'm revising right now, and my copy of Microsoft Word got corrupted, and I lost all my revisions. So that's what I'm doing tonight. That's what I've been working on all week when I can. And so my next book is called Hunger, and it's a memoir of my body, and it's a book about trauma and obesity. And when I was 12, I was gang raped, and I was a good Catholic girl, and I was a virgin, and it was I just was not prepared for something like that. I didn't even know, like, this was a thing that a human being could experience. And so I gained a lot of weight, and on purpose, because I was so small, and I couldn't fight, and so I was like, well, that's not gonna happen again. And it just felt safer to be big. And then 30 years later, you're like, oh, shit, what did I do? And so the book is about sort of coming to terms with, like, that this was deliberate and why, and what it's like to live in a world that is very inhospitable to overweight bodies. It's a very, very horrible world. And it's a book that I think that many fat activists are not going to love. And that hurts very much because some people have already, like, started taking the book to task, even though it's not done, which is odd, but this is my story. It's a memoir. It's not a textbook. It's not an indictment of anyone. It's just my life. And it's been the most difficult book I've ever had to write, because when you have an overweight body, people have a lot of opinions about you, and they share them constantly. And so this is my way of taking control of the narrative and saying, you can put whatever you want on me, but this is my truth. And it's hard to just put this out there and to just admit some of the things that I've held closely for a very long time. But I also think it might be some of my best writing, so we'll see.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. And in terms of taking care of myself, I'm really horrible at it. And I need to get better. But I recently my partner lives in LA, and I recently got an apartment there before we, I don't know, kick it up to the next level. And so I go there to just reconnect and just be soothed. And anyway, it's wonderful. She's my best friend, so. I know. Also, she's mega hot, but.
Hi, and thank you
Hi.
so much for coming. My question also deals with self-care. I'm also from the great Midwest, and you spoke about this in your talk, kind of the constant anxiety about living in a very red state and just seeing the people that you interact with on a daily basis in your community and thinking, you are fundamentally opposed to everything I stand for. So I mean, this is something that we're all going through and trying to figure out and to navigate. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions or how do you self-care in living in a red state?
Yeah, you know, I don't recommend what I do for self-care in a red state, which is I don't interact with anyone where I live. Honestly, I got a really good cable package, and so I have all the channels. Like, I even have like the obscure channels and the weird like sports networks for every region, and I don't watch sports. And so I just made my apartment very comfortable so that I don't have to engage unless I absolutely have to. I have found Indiana to be the most miserable place I've ever lived. And I'm from Nebraska. I love Nebraska, actually. Nebraska's delightful. But it's hard. It's really hard. But that said, for the most part, the people where I live are very kind, and I just struggle because it's like you would deny me the right to live. You would deny me the right to marry my partner. You would deny me so much because of your opinions and your religious beliefs, which I never want to denigrate or disrespect. It's just hard. And so it's hard to balance that in general, these are people that are not evil, but they are not good enough to see beyond themselves and to recognize that I deserve as much dignity as they do. And so I have gotten to the point where I'm so burnt out from being in rural America, which I've been doing for 12 years now, that I have disengaged. And I have found that has made me very happy.
Thank you. Giving
You're
me some
welcome.
hope for living in Kansas.
You live in Kansas?
Wichita.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's also miserable.
Wow. As bad as Indiana is, I know that Kansas is worse.
Yes.
Damn.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
My question has to do with, I guess I recently read the essay that you wrote about rape culture and the way it's portrayed in our media. Like in soap operas, in various media, we treat it as almost like a titillating topic. And as a survivor of sexual assault myself, I feel like I'm struggling to know when is the right time and place to share my experience with the world, with my friends, on Facebook, without having it being just like dismissed as a kind of thing that we hear over and over. I mean, like it's such a, I guess this is a mix-up question, but it's such a hard topic, and I feel like this rage that we're not speaking about it because it's taboo, but I also don't want to share it in a like gossipy way. I'm wondering if you have any input or advice on like how to be vulnerable, what feels right, when, like what your process was in going through that. Thank you.
Yes, that's a big question. You know, it's a very personal thing. There is no unilateral answer for when you disclose. I think it depends on context. Why? Why do you want to share your story in a given situation? And if you are satisfied with the answer to that question, that's when you disclose. it took a long time for me to start to talk about it. And in fact, when Bad Feminist came out, I'm not proud of this, but I didn't tell my parents. And they found out from Time magazine, which don't do. But my mom, it actually helped because it helped my parents to understand me a whole lot more. And my mom asked, why are you writing about this? Why do you need to say this? And I told her, because I've been keeping it inside for so long. And it was killing me. And I guess I just needed to be heard. I needed people to know, like, what can happen to a girl. And so that's when I knew it was the right time. Like, I just knew. And I see there's so much sexual violence in this world, and still people have to explain that this happens, and that it has repercussions, and that everyone is different, so that there is not a singular story of what it means to survive sexual violence. And as long as we have these skeptics and these people who need to be taught about the realities of it, we're going to need to tell our stories. And so, you know, it's really just a question of answering for yourself why, and being satisfied with that answer. You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
My question has to do with like relationships and the sexualization of female bodies. And like as I grew up, I felt like my body was always sexualized when I was young, and I was told I wasn't allowed to wear certain things at school and like throughout high school. And even now, I feel like sometimes you'll get weird looks because you want, like, I like showing off my body, but I'm currently in a relationship, and I love my boyfriend a lot, but I feel like something that we disagree on sometimes, and like I know he doesn't want to, but is like he feels uncomfortable because he knows how people sexualize my body when I go out, and I don't know how to communicate to him that like the way that I dress is like me showing my personality, not me trying to like show off, or I don't know. If you have any advice on that topic.
Oh, girl. I mean, your boyfriend needs to grow up.
Yeah.
He seems nice, but
He's a great guy. He doesn't want to like disagree. Like, and he's like, I don't want to make you change or anything like that. But I don't want to say like to not share my opinion.
yeah, I understand. He's human, but like you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to justify like that. You have to convince him. Like, that's not how it works. It's just not how it works. I mean, that's how it works, but that's not how it works. You shouldn't have to explain yourself. If you want to wear clothes that show off your your killer body, then just show off your killer body and just be like, I'm gonna do me, and you get the benefit. And you can never control what other people are going to do. They're going to sexualize you no matter what you're wearing. Literally, people sexualize nuns, okay? And I mean, I get it. You know, I look at that. I look at that habit and I'm like, what is Mary Margaret doing under there? But so you have to stop worrying about the outside world. I mean, it's easier said than done because we live in a society where women are punished when we are, wear revealing clothing and so on. But yeah, you just have to do you, because you're never going to get him on board. And if he wants to be Mr. Caveman in this one regard, you can allow it. It's a little sexy. And he just has to get on board. And if he doesn't, I trust you, some other man will.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for coming out tonight. You guys have been a delightful and warm audience, and it was a pleasure to come to this Lewis and Clark Gender Symposium.